The first time I wore my cousin Morisela's dress, I was 9 years old. She insisted it would only be a silly joke, something to laugh about for a single afternoon. None of us imagined that one afternoon would quietly grow into years, or that by the end of it I would struggle to remember the face I once expected to see in the mirror each morning. I'm 31 now. Deep inside an old cedar chest that belonged to my grandmother lies one faded yellow dress. The cotton has softened with age, the scalloped collar has begun to curl, and a stubborn tea-colored stain still marks the hem despite every attempt to wash it away. Every so often, when the house is silent, I unfold it beneath the warm glow of a lamp. I hold it carefully, wondering which version of myself first slipped into that dress, because so many versions followed that they blurred together, each believing it would be the last. For years I told a polished story whenever someone wondered why I rarely mentioned my childhood. It was short, harmless, and easy to repeat. The real story is neither of those things. It deserves to be told slowly, because memory rarely unfolds in neat chapters. It lingers in ordinary moments, in quiet glances, and in tiny decisions that no one realizes will change a life. Before I return to that summer, though, let me greet whoever is reading this. Maybe you're sitting beside a rainy window. Maybe you're riding a train home after work. Maybe you're wrapped in a blanket with a warm drink nearby. Wherever you are, thank you for spending these moments with me. Sometimes I like imagining strangers scattered across different cities and countries sharing the same story at the same time. If these memories awaken one of your own, even in the smallest way, I hope you'll hold on to it. Stories remain hidden for years because people believe they're the only ones carrying them. I only learned otherwise when others found the courage to speak first. The summer itself began in my Aunt Rosala's house, tucked away at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a town I still choose not to name. Time has softened many things, but not everyone's memories. Some people who lived there are still around, and some wounds have never fully healed. The house was painted a faded peach color, its walls warmed by years of sun. A lemon tree leaned over the driveway, dropping fruit that filled the air with the scent of citrus and dry earth whenever the afternoons grew hot. Every June my mother brought me there while she worked endless shifts at the hospital. My father drifted in and out of our lives, never dependable enough to care for me through an entire summer. Aunt Rosala had 3 daughters, Morisela, who was 14, Yenia, who was 12, and little Pilar, only 6 years old and convinced I could do no wrong. That made me the only boy in the house. Even as a child I sensed what that meant. I was treated as both a curiosity and an inconvenience, included in everything yet never quite belonging. Morisela was the unquestioned leader of our little world. She had recently discovered eyeliner, melancholy songs, and the effortless confidence that often arrives during adolescence. Everything she did seemed fascinating to me. I admired the scent of her green apple shampoo, the way she laughed with her whole body, and how she nicknamed me Miguito. She let me sit on the floor while she painted her nails or brushed her hair, talking about friendships, crushes, and dreams I barely understood. Listening to her felt like being allowed into a secret club. One warm Wednesday afternoon, while the ceiling fan clicked overhead and a muted soap opera flickered across the television, she looked at me thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "you have really nice eyelashes." No one had ever complimented my eyelashes before. Until that moment, I hadn't considered they were something anyone noticed. Yet hearing her say it stirred something inside me that I couldn't explain. Then came the idea. Her friend Cassandra was visiting the next day. Cassandra's younger brother constantly interrupted their gatherings, so Morisela proposed a harmless prank. She would introduce me as her cousin from another town, a shy girl named Camila, and see how long it took Cassandra to realize the truth. Everyone burst into laughter before the prank had even begun. "It's only for the afternoon," Morisela promised. "We'll laugh about it forever." She was right about the second part. The yellow dress had once belonged to her and happened to fit me almost perfectly. She found that hilarious. I wasn't sure how I felt. She sat me in front of her bedroom mirror and transformed me with the focused patience of an artist. She curled my slightly overgrown hair, brushed powder across my cheeks, added a touch of strawberry lip balm, and clipped tiny earrings onto my ears that pinched enough to make my eyes water. When she finished, silence filled the room. "Oh." That was all she managed before calling for Yenia. Yenia stepped into the doorway, froze, and covered her mouth. Little Pilar wandered in moments later, studied me carefully, and announced with complete sincerity, "She's prettier than you." The room erupted with laughter. I looked into the mirror. What startled me wasn't the makeup or the dress. It was that the child staring back at me didn't feel like a costume. She looked familiar. Not familiar because I'd seen her before, but because something deep inside me recognized her immediately. I expected embarrassment. Instead, I felt an odd, quiet sense of relief. Like opening a door I hadn't known I'd been searching for. When Cassandra arrived later that afternoon, she never questioned the story. She asked what grade I was entering, whether I watched the same television shows she did, and offered me handfuls of pretzels while we sat together on the couch. Before leaving, she hugged me goodbye and whispered to Rosala that Camila seemed sweet, just a little shy. The front door closed. My cousins collapsed into laughter. She actually believed us. We have to do it again. Their excitement filled the room. I laughed with them because that seemed like the right thing to do. But somewhere beneath the laughter, something inside me had become perfectly still. That evening I quietly asked if I could keep wearing the dress a little longer. Rosala smiled in a way I wouldn't fully understand until many years later. Sure, she said. Sleep in it if you want. So I did. I remember the softness of the cotton against my legs, the collar brushing my neck whenever I turned over, the chorus of crickets drifting through the open window, and Yenia breathing softly from the bed nearby. Long after everyone else had fallen asleep, I remained awake. I dreaded morning. Because morning meant the joke would end. Morning meant I would have to become the person everyone expected me to be again. And lying there in the darkness, I encountered a thought I didn't yet have the words to explain. Maybe the person everyone called me wasn't the only person I'd been all along. Morning arrived, and to my surprise, the game never ended. Rosala walked into the bedroom carrying a hairbrush and a little pink makeup pouch as though everything had already been decided. Come on, Camila, she smiled. We're meeting Cassandra at the pool. Your hair isn't going to fix itself. No one corrected her. Not Yenia. Not little Pilar, who had treated our secret with the seriousness of a sacred promise. And not me. A few minutes later I was back on the vanity stool while Rosala carefully brushed my hair into place. Instead of yesterday's dress, she chose a striped sundress with a matching headband. It all felt strangely familiar, as though we'd done it 100 times instead of once. When we walked into the kitchen, Aunt Rosala stood at the stove making breakfast. She glanced at me. Then at Rosala. The spatula paused halfway through turning an egg. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Finally she sighed and asked, in Spanish, Rosala, what exactly have you done to your cousin? It's just for fun, Rosala replied with practiced innocence. Only today. Cassandra's expecting Camila. Rosala's eyes settled on me. And what about you? She asked softly. Do you like this? It was an impossible question. I didn't know what answer she hoped for, and I wasn't sure I understood my own feelings yet. So I answered with the only honest words I had. I don't know. She held my gaze for another moment before returning to the stove. Then perhaps, she said calmly, you have the whole summer to figure it out. I've replayed those words in my mind more times than I can count. There was no anger in her voice. No amusement. No panic. Only the quiet practicality of someone who had weathered enough of life to recognize that not every mystery demanded an immediate solution. Sometimes I wonder if she realized what she was giving me in that moment. Maybe she saw more than she let on. Maybe she was simply too exhausted to argue over children's games. Or maybe somewhere in her own past there had been another child searching for something they couldn't yet name. I'll never know. She passed away when I was 19. And by then I'd spent years pretending those summers had never existed. The pool outing came and went without anyone exposing the secret. Cassandra greeted me warmly. 2 of Rosala's classmates joined us, and they accepted without hesitation that I was simply another cousin named Camila. One of them, Britt, smiled and handed me a bottle of coconut sunscreen. You'll burn if you don't use this, she laughed. I thanked her in a voice that sounded unfamiliar, lighter, softer, almost effortless. I hadn't planned to speak that way. It simply happened. Later I sat at the edge of the pool, my feet dangling in the cool water, wearing an oversized swim shirt and a pair of Yenia's old shorts. I remember staring at the ripples and feeling that my entire world had quietly shifted. I couldn't explain why. I didn't even have words for it. But I knew I wanted whatever this feeling was to continue. June became July. July drifted toward August. Somehow, Camila stayed. Neighbors greeted me by that name. The woman at the neighborhood market smiled whenever I came inside. Even Moricela's boyfriend accepted me without a second thought. No one questioned the story because no one had any reason to. Meanwhile, my mother called whenever she could steal a few minutes between hospital shifts. "How's he doing?" she'd ask. Rosala always answered the same way. "He's having a wonderful summer." I would listen from the hallway. Every time she said he, something inside me tightened ever so slightly. Not because it hurt exactly. It felt more like putting on clothes that no longer fit. Outside the house, everyone called me she, and those words settled around me so naturally that I barely noticed them. They didn't feel like labels. They felt like skin. By August, Camila wasn't simply a name anymore. She had favorite clothes. She loved the navy dress sprinkled with tiny white flowers because Moricela insisted it made her look elegant. She tucked loose strands of hair behind one ear without thinking. She laughed differently. Quieter. Gentler. She crossed her legs differently when she Saturday. No one had taught her those habits. They had appeared on their own, almost as though my body had rewritten itself to match the life it believed it was living. When my mother's car finally turned into the driveway at summer's end, panic filled the house. Moricela rushed me into the bedroom. "Hurry." The dress disappeared over my head. A pair of shorts and an old t-shirt landed in my hands. "Quick," she whispered. "Be yourself again." I dressed as fast as I could. But somehow, the clothes felt unfamiliar. Outside, my mother hugged me tightly. "You've gotten so tall," she laughed. I smiled. I waited. Only after we were several exits down the highway did the tears finally come. I turned toward the window so she wouldn't notice. She sang happily along with the radio while I cried in silence for nearly the entire drive home. By the time school started again, I had convinced myself the summer had simply been an odd adventure. Children have strange vacations all the time. Life would return to normal. Instead, normal felt strangely empty. My classmates talked about football, roughhousing, and playground competitions. I nodded at the right moments, but my thoughts wandered somewhere else entirely. I kept remembering the smell of coconut lotion, Brit calling me little sister, and afternoons spent laughing beside the pool. One day my friend Devon frowned at me. "You're acting weird." I shrugged. "I got sick over the summer." That explanation was enough for a 9-year-old. He accepted it without another question. At night I would lie awake in my own bedroom, staring into the darkness. Sometimes I'd press my hand against my chest and wonder where Camila had gone. She wasn't there. At least, not in any way I could find. But the space she'd occupied remained, as obvious as the pale outline left behind after removing a picture from a wall. Spring eventually gave way to another June. My mother loaded the car for another summer at Aunt Rosala's. For months I had rehearsed telling her I wanted to stay home this time. I'd imagined joining Devon at day camp instead. When the morning finally arrived, I said nothing. I climbed into the passenger seat and watched the miles disappear beneath us. As soon as the familiar cul-de-sac came into view and I spotted Moricela waiting on the porch, an overwhelming calm settled over me. I hadn't realized until then how much I'd missed that place. She carried my bag inside, closed the bedroom door behind us, and leaned against it with a knowing smile. "So?" Her eyes searched mine. "Should we do it again?" There wasn't even a moment's hesitation. Yes. Looking back now, I think that was the day everything changed. The joke had served its purpose. What remained was something neither of us knew how to describe. Yenia seemed to understand more than she admitted. Sometimes I'd catch her studying me quietly across the dinner table before returning to her diary without saying a word. Pilar accepted everything with the effortless certainty only children possess. To her, I'd always been Camila. Aunt Rosala never asked questions. She simply continued living. She cooked our meals. She drove us wherever we needed to go. She even let Moricela spend her saved allowance buying me 2 new dresses from a discount store nearby. Those dresses were washed alongside everyone else's clothes. Folded into the same laundry baskets. Hung on the same clothesline. One afternoon I watched Rosala take them down from the line. She held one dress against herself for just a heartbeat before folding it carefully. When she noticed me watching through the kitchen window, she didn't look embarrassed. She simply nodded once, as though acknowledging something that required no explanation. That second summer taught me something unexpected. Camila wasn't simply pretending anymore. She had become someone with her own instincts. She noticed when Yenia felt lonely. She had endless patience with Pilar. She loved strawberries but couldn't stand watermelon. She hummed the same slow love song whenever she braided Pilar's hair. She smiled differently, thought differently, moved through the world differently. Most unsettling of all, she felt more complete than the child everyone insisted I really was. By the third summer, though, childhood had begun giving way to adolescence. I was 11. My voice cracked unexpectedly. My shoulders broadened. My body had started writing a story of its own, whether I agreed with it or not. The first sign arrived quietly, a faint darkness above my upper lip that seemed insignificant to everyone except me. My mother never mentioned it. Perhaps she didn't notice, or perhaps she believed ignoring it would spare me from whatever I was feeling. One evening in early spring, I stood alone before the bathroom mirror, tracing the outline of my changing face. In that reflection I recognized something I had dreaded without ever giving it a name. Childhood was ending, and with it, the secret life I had built during those endless summers. I locked the door and cried as silently as I could. When my mother knocked, asking if everything was all right, I swallowed my tears and answered yes. She accepted the answer with the gentle trust only a parent can have, never realizing that behind the door I was grieving someone who had existed only inside me. When summer arrived again, everything had changed. The house that once felt like a refuge had begun moving forward without me. The oldest daughter had a job, a boyfriend, and responsibilities that left little room for childhood games. Her younger sister had found friends her own age. The youngest no longer looked at me as though I could do no wrong. Her world had expanded beyond mine. Even their mother seemed exhausted in a way no one understood at the time. On my first morning there, the oldest sister looked at me with quiet kindness and told me we couldn't play our old game anymore. I had grown too much, she explained. People would notice. I nodded because agreeing was easier than asking her to reconsider. But inside, something collapsed. It felt as though the hidden foundation beneath my life had cracked without warning. Later that day, after everyone else was occupied, I slipped into her room alone. I opened the closet and found the dress I remembered so clearly. My hands trembled as I lifted it from its hanger. It no longer belonged to me. The fabric strained across my shoulders, and the hem rested higher than before. The child who had once smiled into this mirror was gone, replaced by someone caught between two worlds. I barely recognized the face staring back at me. I changed back quickly, returned everything exactly as I had found it, and sat on the closet floor until the tears finally stopped. No one knew where I was. No one knew what I had lost. Some losses are invisible because they are not the loss of a person, but of a future that never had the chance to exist. There are no ceremonies for that kind of mourning. No visitors bring food. No one tells you it will become easier. So I carried it by myself. When school began again, I became the version of myself everyone expected. I laughed louder than I wanted to. I joined activities that never interested me. I memorized the posture, vocabulary, and confidence of the boys around me, treating masculinity like a role I had to rehearse every single day. From the outside, I fit in. Inside, I watched the girls around me with an emotion I could not explain. It wasn't envy alone, nor admiration. It was the aching awareness that they moved through a world that had quietly closed its doors to me. Eventually I stopped visiting that familiar house. Instead, I buried myself in school, computers, and anything that demanded logic rather than honesty. It was easier to solve problems than to ask myself why I always felt like I was watching my own life from a distance. Years passed before I returned. The visit came because of a funeral. Grief had gathered everyone back under the same roof. Faces were older. Voices were softer. The house itself seemed smaller than I remembered. She found me sitting alone and took my hand without speaking. After a long silence, she whispered that she was sorry. She never explained what she meant. She didn't have to. Those few words carried every memory we had never discussed, every silence we had allowed to grow between us, and every goodbye we had spoken without realizing it was permanent. For the first time, I understood that regret can belong to more than one person. Later that afternoon I wandered into the bedroom that had once held so much of my childhood. Most of it had already been packed away. Dust floated through the light spilling across the mirror. I sat before it again. This time I saw only the teenager I had become. The child I mourned wasn't staring back at me anymore. Yet I realized something unexpected. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply retreated somewhere deep inside me, waiting for a day when I would finally have the courage, and the language, to remember her without pretending she had never existed. Life continued after that. College, relationships, careers, ordinary conversations. I became skilled at presenting a version of myself that was polite, dependable, and easy to understand. But every meaningful relationship eventually stumbled over the same invisible barrier. People knew my accomplishments. They knew my routines. Very few knew me. Looking back now, I understand that survival sometimes teaches us how to wear convincing masks. They protect us when we are young. The difficult part comes later, when we realize the mask has become so comfortable that we no longer remember the face beneath it. Healing did not begin the day I found answers. It began the day I admitted that the person I had hidden for so many years had never truly vanished. She had simply been waiting for me to come looking. For years I became an expert at pretending. The version of me that greeted professors, laughed with classmates, and answered family phone calls knew exactly what to say. That version never stumbled, never admitted confusion, never asked difficult questions. Everyone seemed to like that person. The problem was that I was disappearing behind them. The moment everything changed arrived without ceremony. It wasn't at a dramatic crossroads or during some life-altering event. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday night while I waited for my clothes to finish drying in a nearly empty laundromat. An older woman stood nearby folding towels with slow, practiced hands. Watching her, I was suddenly carried back years, to another woman, another home, another pile of freshly washed clothes, another version of myself that I had buried so deeply I barely believed she had existed. Without planning to, I whispered into the empty room, "Maybe I've been pretending." The word sounded strange. Then another sentence followed. "I don't think I've ever been the person everyone believed I was." Nothing extraordinary happened. The dryers kept spinning. Someone opened the front door, collected their laundry, and left. Life continued exactly as before. Only I hadn't. For the first time, the truth existed somewhere outside my own thoughts. That was enough. The next morning I called someone who had unknowingly stood at the beginning of my story years earlier. We spoke carefully, almost nervously, like people walking across thin ice. I admitted that those childhood summers had meant far more to me than games. I admitted that I had spent years trying to erase them because remembering hurt too much. When I finished, there was silence. Finally she said, "I've wondered about you every year." Neither of us blamed the other. We were children trying to understand things that adults often struggle to explain. Some apologies are less about guilt than about mourning the years no one knew how to save. After we hung up, I made one tiny promise to myself. Not a transformation. Not a declaration. Just one honest choice. I bought something small that reflected the person I had spent so long hiding. It wasn't expensive or dramatic. It probably wouldn't have attracted anyone's attention. But when I looked into the mirror that evening, I recognized something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. The years afterward weren't magical. There were awkward conversations, uncertain mornings, mistakes, and moments when fear convinced me I should retreat into the safety of the old mask. Sometimes I did. But each time I returned to myself a little faster. The people who truly loved me surprised me. A close friend shrugged, smiled, and asked what name I wanted them to use. Another admitted they had always sensed I was carrying something heavy, even if they couldn't identify it. My mother took the longest conversation. When I finally found the courage to tell her everything, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I wish I'd understood sooner," she whispered. "So do I answered. Neither of us could change the years behind us. But we still had the years ahead. That mattered. Life gradually became less about explaining myself and more about living honestly. I discovered that authenticity rarely arrives all at once. More often it grows quietly through ordinary mornings, difficult conversations, unexpected laughter, and the simple relief of no longer introducing yourself to the world through a carefully rehearsed performance. Today, when I think about my childhood, I no longer see only sadness. I remember kindness. I remember people who unknowingly gave me pieces of myself long before I understood what they were offering. I remember mistakes that became lessons instead of prisons. Most of all, I remember that healing never asked me to erase my past. It asked me to carry it differently. Some keepsakes still live in the bottom drawer of my dresser, not because I need them to remember who I was, but because they remind me how far I have traveled. They are no longer symbols of loss. They are landmarks. If someone asked me what finally changed my life, I wouldn't point to one conversation or one decision. I'd say it was the accumulation of small acts of honesty. One truthful sentence. One trusted friend. One forgiving embrace. One ordinary day after another. Eventually those small moments became a life. If my story offers anything to someone else, I hope it's this. The road back to yourself doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. Sometimes courage looks like speaking one quiet sentence that you've carried for years. Sometimes healing looks like someone sitting beside you without trying to fix you. And sometimes home isn't a place you've been searching for. It's the person you've been learning, little by little, to become.